It's a perfect combination of Jim Gordon's sort of innate genius and Brian Wilson's kind of childlike, imaginative. Yeah, we can do that.
Drummer Jim Gordon was a protege of Hal Blaine, who was, of course, one of the greatest drummers of all time. Well, so is Jim Gordon. Let's just say Hal Blaine had a big impact on getting Jim Gordon on Beach Boys albums, like Pet Sounds and its follow-up, Smiley Smile. In this clip, with Joel Selvin, who just wrote a great book on Jim Gordon called Drums and Demons, we talk about how Jim Gordon, with an orange juice container, changed the sound of one of their big songs. In this clip, we talk about Good Vibrations, which was supposed to be on Pet Sounds in '66, one of the greatest albums of all time, which, by the way, in the beginning, did not get great reviews. It was lackluster in the beginning. Things have changed since then. Good Vibrations was eventually released as a single and was on Smiley Smile in '67. And by the way, Good Vibrations at the time was the most expensive single ever made, and the Beach Boys were right there doing all that magic. They were in top form. And it was Brian Wilson's sweet spot. He was his best at that time. Hal Blaine was there on drums. Jim Gordon was there as well. And we also talk about, before we get to Joel Selvin and his great book, Drums and Demons, we also talk about God Only Knows, which was on Pet Sounds. And the interesting stories behind the drummers and the musicians, and rock and roll is never boring. The new book, as mentioned, is Drums and Demons. It's an inside look at late great drummer Jim Gordon, who passed away in 2023. He was in prison for taking his mother's life, and he basically went into madness. That and a lot more on Rock History Music. Jim Gordon was a professional drummer, born July 14th, 1945. He was famous for being a very popular session musician and was known as a protege to drumming legend Hal Blaine. He played on some classic albums, like the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds. He was in studio with Paul Revere and the Raiders, as well as the Byrds and Judy Collins, and Frank Zappa. In 1970, he was part of Joe Cocker's Mad Dogs and Englishmen tour. He also toured with Traffic and was on 2 of their albums, including Low Spark of High Heel Boys. He was featured on Harry Nilsson's famous Nilsson Schmilsson. There was also Johnny Rivers, Art Garfunkel. Let's not forget he was on Steely Dan's album Pretzel Logic featuring Ricky Don't Lose That Number, and a few tracks on Alice Cooper's 1976 album Alice Cooper Goes to Hell. Gordon was one of the most prolific session drummers of the 1960s and 70s. He was known for his incredible versatility, and as mentioned, famous for playing on some of the biggest songs of those decades. He was born in Los Angeles and began drumming professionally as a teenager. He became a key figure in the Wrecking Crew group, the not-so-famous musicians who played on very famous hits. Let's revisit some of those hits. Layla with Derek and the Dominos. He was part of that band on their one and only studio album. Though he's given a co-write to Layla, there's a lot of conflicting stories that the piano coda in that song was actually written by Rita Coolidge. Then there's You're So Vain by Carly Simon. His drumming's really featured prominently on that 1972 hit that topped the charts in both the US and the UK. One of the most impressive guitar hits of all time has to be Classical Gas by Mason Williams. It's an instrumental, came out in '68, and was one of Gordon's early claims to fame. On that track, nothing but finesse drumming. As mentioned, Ricky Don't Lose That Number by Steely Dan. There was Wichita Lineman by Glenn Campbell, that famous Jimmy Webb song from '68. Again, very subtle drumming, yet essential for that ballad. It's known as one of the greatest country songs of all time. And the Albert Hammond hit from '72, It Never Rains in Southern California. And we'd be remiss if we didn't mention one of the greatest post-Beatle albums of all time by any member of that band, All Things Must Pass, with George Harrison, 1970. There was a dark side to Jim Gordon's life. In the 70s, possibly as early as the 60s, he started hearing voices, most notably his mother's voice. And eventually his condition worsened. Tragically, in 1983, he took his mother's life. He was convicted and sentenced to 16 years to life, though he stayed there for the rest of his life. He passed away in prison on March 13th, 2023. Though there are conflicting stories, it seems his schizophrenia was undiagnosed at the time of the crime. Jim Gordon, one of the greatest drummers of all time, and unfortunately overshadowed by that awful crime involving his mother. God only knows. Orange juice bottles. Who would have thought? And you had said that in the other interview, and I heard you say it before. You can't listen to that song. I didn't know what that was. I noticed it. Tell me about
Can't
that.
hear it any other way now, can you? Yeah, they're just right up in front of the drum kit and prominently in there, and of course that's orange juice bottles, you know. I mean, clip clop, clip clop. What else would do that? It's, it's a perfect combination of Jim Gordon's sort of innate uh, uh, genius and Brian Wilson's kind of childlike, imaginative. Yeah, we can do that.
So he sees
Uh,
him noodling. He sees, what is he? He comes up to him and
Goofing around on a break with orange juice bottles, and Brian goes, "Hey, you know, and let's do it." And he took a razor blade and he cut the orange juice bottles so that they would pitch differently. So he had four different notes: clip clop, clip clop, clip clop, clip clop.
yeah.
And he kind of follows the Hal Blaine drum pattern. And again, like I say, it's just it's such an important piece in the arrangement. Once you know what that is, you never hear that record the same way.
It's Hal Blaine who suggested Jim Gordon to the Beach Boys.
Hal Blaine gave Jim a lot of work. Uh, in 1964, 65, there was just so much recording work in Hollywood. And so it wasn't a super competitive scene with these guys. And they all had the Jim Gordon flash. Here's this like 18, 19-year-old guy who played drums in a way that they'd never heard, that they'd never imagined. It's like Bobby Jones, the golfer, when he saw Jack Nicklaus play the first time, he said, "What game this he plays, I know not." And that's how Jim was. I mean, Jack Nietzsche saw him. Boom, Phil Spector sessions next week. Uh, uh, Harold Batiste heard him on Sonny and Cher session. Boom, he's in the lineup. Lee Hazelwood. Boom, use him on everything. I mean, you know, it's uh, up in the air who played on These Boots Are Made for Walking. Okay, it's really nobody knows. Hal Blaine thinks he played on it. Jim thinks he played on it. The union contract that I've seen says Frank Clapp played on it. No, not Frank Clapp, Richie Frost. So we don't know who played on it, but there may have been different versions of it. I'm not really sure. But he played on all the Lee Hazelwood records. He played on all the Lenny Waronker records. Lenny was starting producing records at Warner Brothers. So he's on those Harper's Bazaar, Beau Brummels, Randy Newman, Ry Cooder. All that stuff is Jim and Lenny. And Richard Perry picked up on him real quick. So like 64, 65, people were hearing Jim Gordon for the first time, and they couldn't book enough dates with him. By 66, he's the most famous drummer in town. He's more famous than Hal Blaine at that point.
I'm Good Vibrations, Jim Gordon.
So Good Vibrations was a record that Brian Wilson started during the Pet Sound sessions and did some work on a version of it with different lyrics and put it away because he realized that the texture was not congruent with the Pet Sound stuff. Once he was done with Pet Sounds, he took it back off the shelf. So this is a track that had like 22 sessions associated with it, $50,000 budget, unheard of at that time. Many musicians, many efforts, many different parts. In the final version is a composite master track. So Hal Blaine is in the first verse and the first chorus. Jim is in the second verse. Hal is back in the chorus. Jim is back in the bridge. Hal is back in the final chorus, and Jim is in all over the outro. So you can tell if you like do the microscopic listening that the drum parts shift attitude and approach during those parts. And especially on the outro, you can really feel Jim. One of the Jim Gordon trademark was the boil. You know what I mean? That after the one, there was a little bit of a bubble, a little bit of a boil, and then we'd get to the four. It wasn't necessarily on the two and three. And that boil had its own sort of uh, uh, fingerprint. It moved around. It was what he applied to that spot. So you can hear the boil very clearly on the outro of Good Vibrations, and it was perfect for what it was supposed to do.
Yeah, I like that chapter on Gene Krupa and that phase. That because I talk to a lot of drummers, and of course Gene Krupa comes up an awful lot, in when we're
I had
talking.
no idea how important a role Krupa played in designing the modern drum set. That was news to me, and I knew stylistically what he'd done for drums, but that he'd actually designed the cymbals and the kit, and that all was news. But yeah, he was this incredible definitional figure of this modern American instrument, the contraption drum set. And he was the one who like constructed the initial vocabulary and created the template for everything that was going to follow. And it was years and years and years before they broke that template.
Early to mid 70s, I remember when I was a big Gordon Lightfoot fan, and I'm watching the back of the album, and I'm going, "Where's Barry Keane? What? Who's this Jim Gordon guy?" And I'm going, "Oh, wait a minute, I've heard his name before." And that sort of opened up for me the fact of opening up another layer of saying, "Who is this guy?" I keep seeing his name, because all of a sudden Barry's not there, and Barry Keane came back later on. But like Sundown, Carefree Highway, I mean, so, I think it was Tony Royster Jr. or it might have been Russ Miller who basically said, "If Leaving Me Is Easy" by Phil Collins. He had said, "If Leaving Me Is Easy" by Phil Collins is one of the hardest songs to play. I'm going, what? What are you talking about? It's so slow. It's so incredibly slow that it's hard to play. And a lot of people who aren't drummers don't know that. But like Sundown, I look at what he did with that. I'm going, oh my God, I don't think I could have drummed to that song.
So that was the first drum. That was the first track they cut.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Lenny wanted to brighten up the Gordon Lightfoot sound. They'd been working on records together, and they got him sort of like, out of the obscure bag. If You Could Read My Mind was getting some action, but he wanted to, do something big with. So he brought Jim to Toronto, and as you say, and Gordon Lightfoot had this tight little creative unit around him, and bringing in an outsider was a big deal. And the first night it was a mess, and Lightfoot called Lenny and demanded he fire the drummer, and Lenny said, "Just one more night, okay?" And Lightfoot said, "Okay." So they go in the next night, and the first song is Sundown. And Lightfoot has this 12-string part, and Lenny says, "Lay out on the two and three so that the 12-string part can be prominently displayed." Oh, no problem. So he lays out, and it just pops, right? It just pops out, and immediately everybody in the studio knows that what they have is going to be a big hit record. And that's Jim's gift. That's what Jim's job was. Jim was there to make this into a hit. 6 days a week in recording studios, 3 sessions a day, 5 songs a session, working with the same like 30 musicians. The level of competence, the level of science, it was surgical type of skill. And the whole dedication was to make this into a hit record. It was not about jazz. It was not about groove. It was not about dance. It was about hit record. And that's what Jim did. And that's him on Sundown.
I know you've got to be someplace. You're having a lunch date, right? I know I make you late for your lunch date.
Prairie Prince.
Oh, what about him?
That's my lunch date.
No way. I love you know what? I love the Tubes. I talked to Fee a little while ago, and of course Todd Rundgren. I love Todd Rundgren, Prairie Prince is one of my, that guy drums like nobody's business. Like, get out of my freaking way. I'm coming through. No way.
He's got a solo album that he's done based on the Ken Nordine record Colors. And I'm gonna have lunch with Prairie and devise his publicity campaign, write his bio or whatever. Prairie Prince is not only one of the greatest drummers of our time, but he's also like one of the coolest people I've ever known.
Okay,
So
you tell him I have 133,000 subscribers. I want to talk to that guy when the time is right. I want to talk to him.
We'll hook you up.
Make sure you comment on our videos, subscribe to our channel, and share our videos. If you want to make a donation to the channel, there's a PayPal link. Also, join our Patreon. You'll get early access to our videos. And we have a swag store where you can buy a Rock History Music t-shirt, cap, and all kinds of different swag with our logo on it. Subscribe to our channel, share our videos, and comment on them. I'm John Bowden. This is Rock History Music. Take care of yourself.